Hello, everyone. It is Tuesday, May 12th, and welcome to today's CG Talk, the 4 EQ Pillars of Wellbeing. My name is Brittany, and I think I know most of you by now, but if not, I'd love to hear from you. So feel free to drop me a line and let me know if you'd like to hear any particular topics, or better yet, if you have a session you'd like to present. One topic we've heard rumblings about recently is that many of you want to hear from your fellow members about what you're learning during COVID to date, whether it's about leadership or management or productivity, anything. So do feel free to reach out to me. I'm pleased to introduce two people today, longtime CG member Pete Anderson from US Bank and his EQ coach, Teresa Quinlan. Pete has been on a personal journey of late, particularly focused on emotional intelligence, or EQ, with the ultimate goal of unleashing the unrealized potential of teams across US Bank. And as part of that journey, he employed Teresa as his personal EQ coach and has found a ton of value. And he reached out asking if we thought the CG community would find these learnings valuable too. Obviously, you know what we said or you wouldn't be here. I have a few housekeeping items before we turn it over to Pete and Teresa. First, today's webinar will be available after the live session, and we'll get that link over to you shortly after the session. As always, feel free to share it with your teams, but please do not post on social media. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's session. So if you have a question for Teresa or Pete, please feel free to send it through the chat, and be sure to send it to all panelists and attendees. Some we might sneak in mid-talk, but we've also reserved time at the end of the session. And at the end, we may promote you to panelist to ask your question, so be prepared to turn on your video and unmute yourself. So without taking up any more oxygen, I'll kick things off by welcoming Pete and Teresa. Thank you both for being here.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Brittany. And so I'm just going to take a second. I've got one of those talks that Brittany was talking about as a member-driven talk on June 5th coming up as well, where I'll be doing a practice session basically for a TEDx that was supposed to be delivered in April, and COVID rescheduled for us to an unknown date. And the title of that talk is The Art of Transformation Beyond Control, and basically covers a few different things around learnings from two different Fortune 125 project to product transformations that I've been involved with, and kind of weaves through some personal and professional stuff into some themes that I'm hoping will be helpful for folks as they look at transformation through a few different lenses. So there's my plug for that. That'll be noon on June 5th. So reach out to Brittany if you want to be involved with that. And then I will hand off to Teresa. As Brittany said, she already described the relationship. Basically, the first quarter of this year, I've dove headfirst into psychological safety, because I had a team that didn't have it, that I inherited, that I'm trying to establish it for, which led into this kind of humble inquiry space, which then led into this emotional intelligence space, which led me to Teresa somehow. I actually can't even remember how I found you, but LinkedIn, some LinkedIn connection. And so I've just kind of continued to move through some of that content and just learn in real life. And no better time to learn about emotional intelligence than just prior to a pandemic. So let me hand it off to Teresa, and you can take it from there.
Thanks, Pete. I mean, you nailed it right there. I think that there is nothing like a pandemic, or COVID-19 has really sort of demonstrated that our emotions play a tremendous role in our performance capacity. And if we are sort of lacking in that emotional self-awareness and our emotional regulation, then we really have a hard time getting things done. And by hard time, that could manifest itself in just low energy. It can manifest itself in difficulty just coming up with creative problem solving, manifests itself in so many different ways. So I'm honored to be here to be able to talk about the 4 pillars of well-being. There are actually 4 emotional intelligence skills that specifically relate to well-being. And well-being and emotional intelligence is really the equivalent of the word happiness. And so happiness has this beautiful sort of element within emotional intelligence. Number 1, it contributes to our emotional quotient. And number 2, when we develop our emotional quotient, it builds on our happiness. So it has this sort of influx and output capacity with emotional quotient, which is really quite incredible. And then there's research that's done that shows that our happiness level is a direct predictor for our success, our performance success. And so we want to be well. We want to have this elevated sense of well-being, especially when we're emotional, especially when risk is high, especially when we're being stress tested. It's the most important time to have it. So let's first answer this question of like, what is emotional intelligence? Because basically it's the question that is usually asked right out of the gate. Like, what is it exactly? And in a nutshell, it's our ability to understand our emotional information, because that's what it is. It's information, important data points. When we neglect it, we become incapable of then regulating what can be driving our behaviors. So emotional intelligence is recognizing our emotional state, what's triggering it, so that we can regulate the emotion and keep our IQ turned on. Because when our emotions get in the driver's seat, our logical brain is inaccessible at that time. So we can't access our rational, logical thinking. And what's interesting is a lot of our EQ skills actually live in the IQ centers of our brain, in our prefrontal cortex. So emotional awareness becomes one of the foundational pillars of accessing the rest of the emotional quotient skills. Let's take a look at exactly the model of emotional intelligence. So there are 5 realms in emotional intelligence: self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, decision-making, stress management. The color-coded makes it a little bit easier to see. So 5 realms, and then in each of the realms, there are 3 skills. So that means we've got a total of 15 skills that we can learn, because they're learnable skills, to elevate our emotional quotient. And some of them, which become almost like buzzwords within workplaces and industries, and a lot of articles you might be reading, are things like empathy, stress management and stress tolerance, things like impulse control. Words like innovation land in different areas of emotional intelligence. And so it becomes really sort of important to recognize that EQ is not just self-awareness. And sometimes that's where the caveat is that people think, well, emotional intelligence is just being aware of my emotions. That's a component of it that's really very important to the whole. But it is all of these other skills that we end up using to be able to do things like build relationships so that we can risk together, fail together, learn together, and then innovate together. It's so that we can create spaces where trust has an opportunity to exist. And when trust exists, we feel psychologically safe. And when we feel psychologically safe, then we feel really confident in speaking up and challenging the status quo, knowing that we won't be at risk to do so. And knowing that when we speak up to challenge the status quo, the other person around us who's also emotionally intelligent is willing to listen. So they're willing to turn on their empathy and understand our perspective. And this allows us to be in a ping pong of conversation, as opposed to what we know what happens when we don't have emotional intelligence in the environment is we end up getting toxic behaviors. And in toxicity, we can have anything along the spectrum of abrasive, abrupt behaviors to quiet, sabotaging behaviors. So within this model, we're looking today at 4 particular skills or pillars for well-being. And I underline them so they can stand out. We're looking at self-regard and self-actualization, which live in that first self-perception realm. We're looking at interpersonal relationships, which lives in the interpersonal realm. And then we're looking at optimism, which lives in the stress management realm. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define each of them for you so you know what they mean. And then I'm going to take you through an exercise related to balance. So you're going to need pen and paper. And after that, I'm going to relate back to your balance exercise how to use the 4 pillars to start tweaking the dial to improve your overall well-being. And then we'll end with the opportunity for questions. So basically, we will dig into the beginnings of this exercise, which you can then take away and over the course of the next week or 2, finish, and then start taking action on the elements that you recognize you can have greater levels of balance in to improve your overall well-being. So here are our 4 pillars. I'm going to start with self-regard. As a definition, self-regard lives in that self-perception realm. So it is how we see ourselves on the inside. When we think about things like authenticity, when we think about esteem, inner strength, this is our self-regard. It is respecting our strengths and our weaknesses and accepting what those things are. It's related to feelings of confidence and related to feelings of self-esteem. When we respect and know what our strengths and weaknesses are, we can actually step into arenas of strength, because when we step into our talents, we feel really good about ourselves, because that's where we're knocking stuff out of the park. And we find ourselves in this cycle of achievement and accomplishment, and that boosts our self-esteem. Totally makes sense. We can probably all think about opportunities in life when that has happened, compared to if we're unaware of what our weaknesses are, and we keep putting ourselves in those arenas, we kind of are almost self-sabotaging our esteem, because we're constantly feeling like we can't achieve anything, but it's because we're not leveraging any of our talents. We're sticking ourselves in our realms of weakness. And we kind of want to avoid that as much as possible, while being aware of our weaknesses also allows us an opportunity in the second pillar, which is self-actualization. So self-actualization is our willingness to persistently try to improve ourselves in areas that bring us meaning and fulfillment. And I think what's really important to recognize there is that it's personally relevant stuff. Now, sometimes we're in jobs or in roles where other people tell us what we're supposed to be learning or what we're supposed to know, and those things don't jazz us up. And when we go to take those courses or read those books, we find that we lack in the motivation to want to get through it. It's dry, it's boring. We get through it and we really haven't learned anything. Compared to when we pick things that are really meaningful to us and we go out and learn them, we are like jazzed up. And you can stay in that zone of learning for so long with super high energy, because you're self-actualizing in what is personally relevant to you. So when we look at the connection between self-regard, knowing strengths and weaknesses, self-actualization, pursuing improvement, it kind of makes sense that we pick areas of improvement that are our strengths, the stuff that we're good at. It's the stuff we've been interested in. It's why we've invested so much time in it already. So investing more time of it really capitalizes on that feeling of self-esteem. And we don't want our weaknesses to be things that derail us or drag us down. So we want to pay attention to it, but the percentage of time we spend in our strengths should be much greater than the percentage of time we spend in trying to improve our weaknesses. Because in our strengths, we're trying to just sort of catapult that into the stratosphere. But our weaknesses, we're just trying to minimize their negative impact. Third skill. Are we ready? Interpersonal relationships. So as a definition, it's our capacity to build and then maintain meaningful, mutually satisfying relationships built on characteristics of trust and compassion. So it's curious, I always find it curious when I talk about interpersonal relationships to ask people what they would choose as their top 10 core values, the guideposts that live their lives, and is some version of trust and compassion in their top 10 list. And for a lot of people, some sort of version of those two words will be in their top 10, which is, I think, highly speaks to how important relationships are to our well-being, and how important it is for us to know how to build and maintain relationships of the highest quality that are mutually satisfying, whether we do this in our personal life with our tribe, and or we're also doing this in our workplace with our tribe. Because if we think about performance, we can only perform as good as the individuals involved. So if I'm a lone wolf, then I can only perform to the strengths of my strengths. And I can only perform to also the impact of my weaknesses. So when I surround myself with a tribe of people and I have high quality relationships, guaranteed some of those people in my tribe will be strengths in my areas of weakness. And together we're collectively so much better to achieve the performance outcome. So when we think of its impact to well-being, we're thinking about the tribal relationship. We are also hardwired as human beings to be connected to other human beings. And so striking up relationships that are built on trust and compassion means that we can be vulnerable, that we can trust within being psychologically safe. So it means we will risk. And when we risk, we step outside of our comfort zone. And when we step outside our comfort zone, we're self-actualizing. When we self-actualize, we're building upon our self-regard. We're amping up our esteem. So all of a sudden, I'm hoping you're seeing, you're like, oh yeah, these pillars are really strong pillars that all work together for how we feel on a day-to-day basis. Now, the last one that might be just sort of all encompassing is optimism. And optimism is also, interestingly enough, it's a personality measure. So, pessimism is not a personality measure. It just so happens to be a word that describes someone who might be low on the optimism scale. But pessimism is not the opposite of optimism. And I think that might be a nice nugget to take away. So if you're calling yourself pessimistic, maybe a change in perspective which helps our well-being is to think that I'm just low on the optimism scale. I am optimistic. I just happen to live low on it. And that's part of my personality. So it's a skill that you can grow regardless of where you sit personality-wise. Optimism is our skill set under our positive attitude and outlook that we can influence an outcome. It can be related to the word hope. So I have great hope that I have the skills within myself to influence the outcome that I want to see happen. And if we think about that as an overriding sort of umbrella around, or maybe a blanket around well-being, if I have hope that I can influence and I have strong interpersonal relationships, I'll turn to my tribe when I need help. So when I need other people to help with the outcome that I'm looking for, I turn to my tribe. And when I ask for help, it's a way for me to extend stepping into and accepting my weaknesses under that self-regard umbrella. When I accept a weakness and ask for help, something amazing happens to our internal wiring. We stop the shaming and blaming game. So if I step into a weakness willingly and ask for help, and I don't shame myself for not knowing how to do it, I grow as an individual. My happiness starts to soar. So we can start to pick apart these pieces of well-being and look at, well, in emotional intelligence, our ability or our level of ability is related to how well we do these things when we're emotional. So when risks are high, when stakes are high, when resources are low, when we're being stress tested, how happy can you remain? And when stress is mounting, because our skills and EQ are only as good as they are when they're stress tested, can I have sort of the wherewithal to be able to go, oh, wait a minute, I'm feeling it. And now I'm feeling my happiness level dropping. I remember, can I look at these 4 things and decide which one do I need to dial up or amplify to start to make a positive difference in my current experience? So this brings us to a really key element, which is known as balance. And establishing our own personal balance is really about choosing a life by design rather than a life by default. So oftentimes what can happen is we can be living in our life and be doing things on autopilot and responding to things that are coming to us and really thinking about them in that terms of, this is happening to me. A mindset shift for well-being and balance is to say, wait a minute, this is happening for me as an opportunity to choose the life I want to live. So now I design the life. I choose to say yes or no. I choose to integrate or not to integrate. I choose to engage or not to engage. And by choosing, I get to live the life that I've designed. And no longer can I then enter in the shame and blame game when I have the choice. So balance is established by first recognizing, where might I be out of balance? And this is the exercise that can bring you some really great clarity. So you are the center of your universe. Let's just acknowledge that and go, yep, I am. I'm the center of my universe. And then we will have all of these components of our life that are really important to us. And everyone's circles around me will be different. And some will be very much the same. So I'm just doing an example here that one of the circles can be health. Another circle can be spouse, children, pets, family, friends, could be hobbies, could be travel, financial, spiritual, community, volunteer. You can have a ton of different things in these circles. And everyone has the power within themselves to choose, what am I putting in the circles? How many do I have? This is just an example. So you can have way more than 6. You can also have less than 6. I did this with my son. He had 5 circles around him. My husband came in to take a look at the exercise and he's like, you have less circles than your mom. Do you need to put more? And I'm like, no, he doesn't. Great question. No, he doesn't. Your circles are your circles. So once you identify what they are, the next thing you do is beside the circle, you place everything that makes this circle fulfilling. And these are action-based items. So for example, in my health circle, this is my personal health circle. For it to be fulfilling for me, I need 7 hours of sleep every night. I need to work out 1 hour minimum every day. I need to eat healthy all meals of the week, except for Friday night's meal is a splurge. I should have in here, I eat chocolate daily. That is actually a health requirement. When I don't have it, I intentionally go out and buy more. Drink 8 glasses of water per day, meditate 10 minutes daily, walk in nature almost every day of the week, get a massage or a chiropractic at least once per month, and go to the dentist twice per year. So it doesn't take too long to actually start to populate these. It's not what am I doing, it's what do I need to be doing for this area to be fulfilling. And once you have it populated, you then self-assess. How satisfied am I with how I'm doing? How fulfilled am I in this area? And you give yourself a rating, 8 out of 10. 8 out of 10 may mean I'm satisfied and I'm fulfilled. And that's really good. You don't have to take action on something you're satisfied with. So I'm an 8 out of 10 with health, and I'd be a 10 out of 10 if I did the chiropractic and massage on a more regular basis, but I don't. It's not a deal breaker for me. Now, if your health circle is a self-rating of a 2 out of 10 and you're unsatisfied with it, that's when you have to start to take action. And this is when we look at, how do those 4 pillars relate back to my circles? So if I know that I want to tweak the dial in my health, optimistically, do I have it within me? Do I feel positive that I can influence the outcome and be more successful here? Is this a meaningful area? Yes, self-actualized. I already picked it. Can I turn to friends and family members in my circle for help in my health circle? Am I going to steal time from work, 15 minutes per day perhaps, to start doing 15 minutes of exercise per day? I'm going to tweak the dial until I get to areas of satisfaction around all elements in my circle. Because here's the deal, we cannot run uphill for very long. So if you try to turn the dial all the way to 10 on everything that isn't a 10, you will sustain it for like a day and then be so emotionally and physically exhausted that you will rip up the piece of paper and throw it into the wind and just be frustrated. Well, why put yourself through that kind of torture? We don't need to do that kind of stuff. We want to have a steady climb towards what we're aiming for. And that steady climb may mean I'm adopting a new habit tomorrow morning. I'm getting up 15 minutes earlier. I could do that, and I'm going to spend that exercising. Great. And you will soon notice that as you reap the rewards of improved well-being, greater levels of happiness, all of the tweaks become easier to do. It also becomes easier to edit the tweaks that you decide to make. Because at the beginning, you may go, man, I got a lot of stuff that I want to change. And then you start to change the ones of highest priority and recognize, turns out, I only needed to turn the dial on 3 and everything else balanced out. It goes by quick, everybody. Oh, thank you, Paul. ADAS is, yes, basically a made-up thing. I totally agree with you. It's a number I put in there that when I drink 8 glasses of water per day, I feel really good about that. Sometimes because I'm a marathon runner, I end up drinking 12. But if I go below that minimum, my endurance, athleticism suffers a little bit. So for me, it turns out to be a quote unquote magic number.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. The one thing I would just kind of chime in on too is as far as the practicality of some of the stuff that we've talked about. I know for me, I was in an individual contributor gig for a long time as kind of a enterprise-wide influencer, but I didn't have a team of my own, and so I took on a team of my own in September, October, and ultimately it was, I realized very quickly that all of a sudden my words took on a different meaning than I intended them to sometimes, or they got more powerful than I thought they would be or should be. And so for me, like learning some of the, number one, just to understand my own like EQI or whatever we called it on the 2.0 little self-assessment that we went through, this was super valuable for me to, and eye-opening on like, hey, I'm normally a good test taker. Like this didn't feel positive to me. And so I've finally adjusted my perspective on and just accepted where I'm at. And then ultimately I'm getting called out now as somebody that is leading through COVID because of some of the things that I've learned here, and being able to identify a trigger of when I'm in the moment and being able to not respond the way that I would have responded in the past as an individual, and now looking at it as a responsibility as a leader. To help guide people through it. And little things like as an individual contributor, I didn't really have to develop deep relationships. I developed a ton of relationships, but none of them were horribly depth filled. They were just partnerships that allowed us to all have win-win situations. And now that I'm leading people, it's really, I'm just doing tiny things. Like every day I want to reach out to 3 people and just touch base and see how they're doing, period. Like no work-related stuff at all. Just like, how are you holding up? And what can I be thinking of for you, and how can I support you, and all those types of things. Minor things that become kind of exponentially valuable over time. And so part of the reason I wanted you to be able to talk to this audience is because I think there's a lot of us that are in that same boat. And I don't know how much time other senior leaders have taken to actually dig into this stuff. I think sometimes it gets shortchanged for, no, I've got to go deliver against a roadmap. Screw that other fluffy stuff that you're talking about. And I would say this actually kind of unlocks to your point earlier. If you can create a psychologically safe place, it unlocks all the skills that kind of come with the team that you've got. So it's my blabber on the topic, but I've just found it super, super helpful over the last quarter.
Nice. That's great. Charlie put a great question in the chat here. Like when you start to populate, like what is part of your circle? Absolutely, Charlie. There will be elements that you're like, it would help it to be more fulfilling for sure, but it's not a deal breaker for me. And so certain elements within your to be fulfilling will have different weighting factors. In a relationship, so like in a spouse circle, we have, these are the things that I need for my relationship with my spouse to be impactful, is all about what you need in that. So we don't actually engage the other person in, what do you need or what do you want in my spouse circle? And that's not what it's all about. This is your center of the universe. Now, if your spouse also does this exercise and they fill in their spouse box, this is a great exchange of being able to say what each other needs for it to be fulfilling for them. And that's where you may create some really creative problem solving or solution finding to how you spend your time together so that you both have fulfillment in your circles.
Yeah, that's helpful. But I'm curious, like, I suppose over the course of, you say you have 5 circles, each of these, and it is different for everybody, but what are some of the areas that maybe you have found kind of hide on us, right? The things that maybe we don't necessarily, it's not top of mind, but has probably a greater impact on our well-being than we think of.
Yes, hobbies is the biggest one that most people are either ignoring, forget to put in a circle, but as soon as I mention it to them, they go, oh my God, that's right. These are the things in the back of my mind that I'm like, I wish I had more time for: golf, painting, learning a musical instrument. And they can list off like 5 or 6 different things that they want in there. And then sometimes this is where the, like Pete mentioned, like the emotional exacerbation of it is like, oh God, yeah. The quarantine shined a light on my lack of hobbies, because all of a sudden you're sitting there twiddling your thumbs going, what am I going to do with all this time by myself, right? Sometimes you're just like, oh, wait a minute, now I can do all of those things that I've been wanting to do that my work circle has been consuming all of my time for. So I would say the hobby circle for sure is the one that people, when they start to go, right, my hobbies, they find the greatest amount of stress around, because they're, number one, maybe not doing them, and number two, can't see how to find time to do them. And directly related to that is their work circle. And when they actually write out what they need for their work circle to be fulfilling, and then compare it to what they're currently doing for work, and most of that I'm talking about length of time, there is this like, how am I going to pull back? I want 8 hours per day, but I'm currently giving 10. How am I going to pull back 2 hours per day? And this comes back to that. It's not a 10 to 0 sort of movement, or 0 to 10 sort of movement. We can't do that. It's too uncomfortable. It stretches us too far outside our comfort zone. We won't take the first step. So you have to think about, what's the first step outside the comfort zone is, I'm just going to claw 15 minutes. And what am I going to do with it? Some people are like, I can't do anything for 15 minutes. Turns out when you're learning a new instrument, 15 minutes is long enough at any one time. Or when you're getting back to painting or whatever it is that is your hobby, it could be just enough time to get started. And you think of it as radio dials. Like, you're constantly shifting them to find the balance. And once you hit it, you'll know you're in it, because your well-being is just, it floats so high. And almost, if you maintain that balance, almost nothing can penetrate through that beneficial armor of well-being. Like, when stress comes your way, you'll just be like, I got this, because I'm in balance.
Sure. Actually, Liz makes a good comment here related to that. She says, thank you for acknowledging that this often gets dumped under stress to hit goals. So in a team environment, of course, it's easier when it's just us, managing our own well-being. But when you extend that beyond to teams, and she says, I had a manager who derailed any culture discussions by literally rolling his eyes as he started to talk, and using air quotes, when he said the word culture. Tough times are when we actually need to dig in to make sure we self and teams are safe in all ways. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm trying to do as we go through transformation at the bank is to drive. We've got about 7 product values that we always talk about, with humility at the center, and then from kind of the head and the heart, you've got passion, curiosity, and what was the other one? Empathy. And from a delivery perspective, you've got a bias toward action, fun, and ruthless focus, and so on. And so you toss up 7 circles on a slide, and everybody go, all the senior leaders go, that seems soft. And what I'm trying to do, and what I'm doing more and more, is translating those to the behaviors that correspond with them. And so if you are not humble, this is what it looks like. It looks like you're making assumptions, and you're actually delivering crap that's not going to add value. If you're humble, you're going to assume that your idea is wrong first, and quickly test it, do product discovery before you launch something, in order to figure that out. And the same types of things. And you can do that with all 7 of those values, or whatever values you choose to come up with. And I think that translation to behaviors in a team environment is super, super critical. And then The other thing I was going to comment on, a slightly different topic, is I send out a weekly email. I printed mine this week because I need to actually keep track of what I said I was going to do. But I send out to my team and just say, you know, these are in order for this week to be successful, this is what the outcome should look like for me. And so like there's five or six things this week that I just told them, like, this is what I'm trying to figure out. Like right now, because we're in transformation, we have everybody raising their hand to own the same stuff. So we're just stepping all over each other. And so one of the things is just a clear definition of who owns enterprise training strategy. Another one is I can articulate how each of my team members is holding up within COVID. So that means I'm going to have to talk to them, that I'm going to have to interact with them, understand how they're doing as individuals, so on and so forth. I'm able to share 1 to 3 practical things from this session because I told them this session was happening. I get another couple of TEDx practice runs on the calendar. So we just announced one earlier. I've got 2 others that I landed on yesterday. 75% of my work in progress has moved through to complete, and our leadership team has made some progress in our reorganization that we can clearly articulate to them. So that's not everything on my to-do list, but it's 6 of the big things that I know both impact them and impact me. And so as I create that type of a list, I'm trying to view through their eyes what's going to also help them be more comfortable with where we are in the transformation and so on. So I would say that it's loosely related to the things that we're talking about, but I'm trying to make sure that you guys also don't miss oh, it's a piece of paper with circles on it. What the hell, Teresa? I'm not going to do this. So like, don't dismiss the exercise, because I think there is practical application to the exercise. And there are a couple exercises that Teresa has asked me to do that I've completely dismissed because I'm not emotionally ready to do them. But that's not her fault. That's my fault. So, but yeah, so it's,
you bring up a really good point. Like a really good point is the exercise itself doesn't solve anything. The exercise itself brings awareness of where you're out of balance. And then the individual has to make the choice. What am I going to do about it? What do I want to do about it? Where do I want to begin? So again, Charlie brings up a good point. How do you prevent yourself with the guilt, like feeling guilt? I want all of them to be at 100. I want them all to be 10 out of 10. And like, so guilt is a fabulous emotional state because it is almost always connected to belief systems related to should and expectations that we learned somewhere. And we could have learned them from when we were raised, or it could be messaging that we get on a constant basis. So we have this legacy hardwiring and software within our brain that kind of shows up every once in a while, and we feel it emotionally first. And you might be able to label it and go, that's guilt I'm feeling right there. So my first encouragement is to just sit with the guilt for a minute, give it time, because when we give our emotions space and time, their intensity dissolves. Intensity dissolves only when we maintain our focus on our thought process. So our thinking will drive our emotional states, especially if our thinking is meant to reinforce the emotion. So for example, if you keep thinking, I should be doing, oh my goodness, that's not going to be great. If I share this with anyone, they're going to think that I can't do anything. And so you're just sort of amplifying the emotional experience of guilt, and you're shitting all over yourself. And what we want to do is, this exercise has the full intention of, yes, be emotionally aware if that creeps in, and just stay with it for a moment. Then bring yourself back to, this is allowing me to be aware of where I am in balance, yes, and where I am out of balance, got to do something about that so that I can be in greater balance. This is all for my level of well-being and happiness. Am I worth it? Damn straight I'm worth it. So what do I want to do about my relationship bubble? It's not fantastic. And COVID kind of is handcuffing my wrists a little bit here. So I'm going to need some creative problem solving around this. Is it Zoom calls, virtual phone calls, or, I went to pick up my car, and my neighbor was also at the same place picking up her car, and she works in healthcare. So I'm like, hey, how is work going? Like, how are you doing at work? And how are you managing your empathy and empathy distress? And oh my God. And she's like, it's great. And she literally walked like straight up to me to have a conversation. I'm like, we're supposed to be 2 meters apart. And she said, I'm so used to being covered up and being able to come right up to people. We both started laughing, and I thought, totally fine. Like it lasted all of about 10 seconds. I
Yeah.
think we're okay. Although I know where I'm coming if I start to experience some symptoms. And so right now creates the perfect sort of storm of dialing up our creativity and taking control where we have control, and also learning how to accept what is not within our control and emotionally be well with that, or turn to another circle to amp up where we do have greater control, like our hobbies. I have greater control here. So if I can't get all of my well-being balanced in this area, I can seek balance in more, perhaps other areas, and get as good as it's going to get right now.
Phil, we had a team call earlier today, and Phil started the call off by saying, you know what, first let's just take a minute, breathe, right? Close your eyes and work through the breathing. But then let's just all go around and talk about those things that we're grateful with and, you know, or for. And one of those things that came up for me was, yeah, I've really been leaning on, thankfully, I have a hobby, and noticing, right, that every time I do that, I come back with this sensation of, well, these things are totally within my power. Because if I can do this, duh, that's easy, right? Everything seems just a little less heavy.
Yeah. Lisa's got a question, like, have you done this exercise with a group of people? How did it go? Or would you consider it best on an individual basis? So yes, I've done it in both ways. My decision making around when to do it in a group is, it's great with a group of people who have that kind of interaction capacity around each other. Because it's an exercise we tend to do like paper like this, how much I want to share within the group can actually be really enlightening in strengthening relationships and allowing people to see me outside of my work, me, and get to know me in a deeper level, which from a group perspective can be really impactful to deepening work relationships, connecting at work on a deeper level. So when we argue or disagree on something, we'll probably do it with much better behaviors because we have a deeper connection, a deeper knowing of each other. It can be sort of the beginning steps of that when you do in a group. Doing it with your family, it's one of the best exercises to do with a family or even a group of friends, because it helps to highlight for individuals where they're struggling. And if you happen to be someone who listens to solve problems, you have to rein that in a bit. Because when people, well, actually have to rein it in a lot, because when people are sharing their list, it's not for you to solve, it's for you to create the space for them to share. So, you know, doing things like leaning back and folding our hands on our laps and nodding and saying things like, what else? And how does that show up for you? And tell me more about what you're thinking and what are you feeling that you haven't mentioned yet? And just probing. That's how we demonstrate empathy. We're seeking to understand their perspective, but we're also giving space for them to share so we can understand them better. And eventually what ends up happening when you ask the question, so what do you think you'd like to do with your circles? Like, where do you want to take action? Because they've had space to share and they feel heard and understood. If they don't know what to do, they're more likely to ask for help and listen when help is offered. As opposed to when we jump in and go, you know what you should do with that? You should totally do. And they're like, oh, I can't hear anything you're saying because I don't think you care about me. You just want to tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm. Nikki says, my organization went through reductions on Friday. Our team had trust before this action, and I know that they are struggling now. I think this is a powerful tool for them to have a structure to communicate their needs. How would you recommend taking them through this exercise while remote? Well, that's a great question.
Yes, really great. Well, I mean, you could see it. It's not like a difficult exercise visually. I can also provide it for Brittany or Charlie to send out to the group, which has instructions on it. So you don't have to sort of memorize, how do we do this again? I think that one of the key things in leadership is always going to be authenticity. And if you are leading in this exercise from a place of caring, like your intention to do it is because you care, because you're noticing some struggle and you want to be helpful and you learn something you think might be helpful, so you're bringing it to them, like saying those words out loud helps people to understand your intention and lean into that intention instead of telling them the stories of they're just trying to cover their asses for having to lay people off and I'm going to be next. And like, you have to help people with that internal dialogue, and you can only help by being authentic and leading from that space of really caring about them. And you can only lead from that space if that is your intention and you mean it. So just say it out loud to them, introduce the exercise and do it with them. And some people will be incredibly receptive because they're ready for it, and other people will be the opposite end of that spectrum and they'll be resistant to it because they're not ready for it. And other people will float somewhere in between that spectrum. But every person will benefit, even the one who's totally resistant, because they'll think about what's happening and it will be meaningful to them at some point. It might not be today or tomorrow, but at some point they'll go, oh, remember when we did that exercise? Or even better yet, they'll go, I remember we did some sort of exercise, but what I really remember was they said they cared about me. Now I'm ready to do this exercise.
And it's a long game that you're playing. As much as the short game feels like we have to change everything now, or we have to move somebody from point A to point B. A lot of the relationship stuff, I'm realizing at least, is a long game. And so I took this team on in September, October. It's been 6-7 months now. And just now I've got some of the ones that were really burned under the previous leadership are just finally getting to a spot where they trust what I've said. And I've had to say it, I mean, umpteen times. If it were a wall, I'd have a bloody forehead from pounding my head against it. It's like, I love you, damn it, over and over again. And so I mean, now it's at a spot where we're actually getting the ideas out on the table without having to beg people to contribute and so on. But it's a long play, and they've got to hear it over and over again. So
we have to remember that people bring their entire relational and emotional diary with them everywhere that they go. And so regardless of how amazing you are at caring for people, if I've had a history of the opposite, I'm not going to just leap into that with you, because all of my history comes with me. And so I think it's critical in leadership to remember that our responsibility is not to like fix people. It's not to force them into particular exercises. So there's a question up there from Charlie around like, what if someone's resistant? Should we still push it? No, you create the space for them to do it, and you take everyone through it. If they're like looking at you, twiddling their thumbs, just let them look and twiddle their thumbs. It's totally fine. Our responsibility is to recognize that something is off. And we only know if something is off because we spent the time to get to know what it looks like when they're on. And so if I know what it looks like when they're on, and then I recognize something's off, then I'm responsible as the leader to step in and say, I noticed something's a little off. What's up? Would you care to share? And if I've done the day after day, moment after moment work of creating space for the climate of trust to exist, when I ask that question, they will respond and they'll tell me what's off. And all I'm doing is listening. That's all I ever need to do. Maybe probing, because people only share about 11% of what they're thinking when they first speak. So if I'm thinking 900 words, I've only given you 100. That's 800 things they haven't said yet. That's a lot of stuff. Totally. And so I might probe and probe and probe until they go like, that's it. You're like, okay. So what is it that you want to do about that? Is there a way that I can be helpful towards that? It's not my job to fix. It's my job to ask and then to coach their capacity to move forward. And then to be able to support them in any way that's necessary for that. It's also my job to uphold the expectations of performance. That's what we do. We're the keepers of that responsibility. And so if I listen, and then I say, okay, we also need to achieve this today. Can you do that with this going on? And they say, no, I can't. Well, what do you need? I'm going to need a day off. Well, let's take a day off. I'm going to need 10 minutes to grab a coffee. Go grab a coffee. in 10 minutes, let me know how you're doing and if you're ready to proceed. Like, that's what we do. You're like, I don't know, I'm just going to maybe take it easy today. No, I'm sorry, that's not an option. But you could take a wellness day today if you need to, or a sick day today, or a personal day today if you need to. Do you need to talk it out a little bit more? You know, we don't do this game of compromising, but oftentimes that's where we get stuck as leaders, is we think I can be empathetic or assertive. No, you can be both at the same time. But this comes from knowing, what do you look like when you're on? So I know what you look like when you're off.
Yep.
And then I give you the responsibility and ownership of changing it.
That's the other thing that kind of ties in, and I could see how you could use the circle exercise to feed into their own, whether it's in this state where you're responding to a layoff or something like that. It's a different animal. I'm not basically saying, hey, how are you going to do personal development after your friend just got walked out the door? But ultimately, so I mean, I can see you trying to do it just for balance on how do I stay sane in the midst of this and get grounded again. From a personal development perspective, I've asked each of my people to have a development plan that I don't care about, ironically enough. Like, I don't care what you choose to develop. So I liked what you were talking about earlier around the self-actualization components of, you know, what are those things that you lose track of time because you're digging into them and you really enjoy them. And so I've asked my team to each have a plan, not for performance review purposes or anything like that, but just for their own benefit. And to just say, like, we are coaches and scrum masters in an organization that we are attempting to change. We have to model what it looks like to have a growth mindset. And so I don't care what you choose to learn about or what areas you want to work on. Just make sure that you're passionate about them and you want to share them with others. And that's it. Like, there's no ABC grading at the end of that process. It's just, do you have it or do you not? And are you real about it? Because it's the only thing I don't have time for is somebody that's not ready to learn something and doesn't want to extend themselves. So.
Because it's in conflict with your core value, like your core value of growth and learning. When someone behaves in conflict to it, you emotionally feel it and you dig your heels in and you defend it, right? We all do that with our core values, which was an important exercise that we also did together.
Yes, exactly. Well, and it's in alignment with the values that we have for the transformation as a whole as well. So I think it's part of the reason I like change stuff so much, is just that. Like, I value it personally, and I want to be able to drive it organizationally. So it's and our coaches and scrum masters truly are the folks that have to help people learn to work differently. So,
Tommy, yes, this is possible to do with families and with your family. So I did do this with my son specifically because I had noticed not necessarily floundering, but like a lull in energy. And so I did this exercise with him, and it highlighted for him why his lull in energy. He loves his friends. And it's not that he didn't know he wasn't spending time with them. He wasn't aware of the impact it was having on not spending time with them. And so by heightening that sort of awareness around, oh, that's really bothering me, then asking the question, well, what would you like to do about it? I can't do anything about it. And you're like, okay, well, you can't do like the things you would have done before, but are there other possible ways of like connecting with your friends? And he was like, well, I guess we could do like virtual conversations. Like, totally could do that. What else might you be able to do? And, you know, based on our life experience, sometimes we can be really creative and think of a lot of things. And sometimes we can think of one or two and we're kind of then dead in the water. And this is then when, as a parent, you can say, would it be helpful if I offered or helped you think of some other ideas? Like, what if you did some artwork? And I don't know how old your kids are, Tommy, but what if you drew or wrote a note to your friend and we go and put it in their mailbox? Because we can do those kinds of things. What if on the sidewalk you did a picture for your friend outside of their house? And what if, and you might come up with something that they go, oh, I like that idea, and they take your idea, or you might say something that they go, not quite that, but this, and it sparks an idea for them. So it can create great conversation dynamic for then kids to own their own well-being and happiness and how they want to go about achieving it. You're welcome.
So I think we have time for one more question. if anybody has one. In fact, we can just start promoting to panelists, everybody, and you can turn on your video and ask whatever you've got. Otherwise, I think we're coming up on that last mark. Oh, Jonathan asked, can you send other ideas like the one you just shared out with the group after the call?
Like meaning what you do with your family? I'm a better responder when I know what's the question.
Yeah, probably ideas related to kids. Jonathan, can you here?
Can you expand, or Jonathan, just like what's the what's the thing you want to know?
I just promoted him to panelist.
Yeah.
And we'll go ahead and start promoting everybody else as well. So whoever can stick around. Oh, Jonathan, you're muted.
Hi, sorry, I didn't want the sea air to interfere there. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, no problem. No, I mean, I just thought that when you talk through that specific example of asking, okay, what if you did a note to your friend and put it in the mailbox? What if you drew in chalk outside their house? Like responses, smart responses to overcoming obstacles where people are not owning, as you outlined, the different things they can control inside each of the circles. I think you're probably right to suggest that it would be better for you to react to specific questions, but since our time is limited and you have so many good ideas, just wanted to put it out there if you have anything else to share that would spark, like you said, other things that we could ask or challenge ourselves to do.
Sure. Sometimes I ask the blanket question of like, what if you were to try something that you've never tried before? What would it be? Because the answers are always inside people. They have them. Sometimes they're just afraid to say them out loud because they think they're stupid. And so we just have to give permission for people to like say something stupid. Generally, I share the stupid ideas and I leave the good ones for them to share. So I'll share the ridiculous stuff like, what if you drew in chalk on the sidewalk a picture? And my son looks at me, he's 14. He looks at me, he goes, I'm never going to do that. I'm like, okay, so what would be something you would do? And then he's got 4 of them lined up. So, you know, what if you were to do something? What do you think your friend would appreciate, and get them to think from the perspective of the other person?
Got it. So if I said to Phil, what if you were to draw in chalk outside Warren Buffett's house? And he said, I would never do that, but I might actually do this.
Yes.
I think he might actually do it though.
He might. He might.
Yeah. You can even ask them, like, if you look at your other circles in your areas of like interests and strengths and talents and things you really enjoy, what one of those pieces could help you here?
Yeah.
And those are coach-based questions, right? You're trying to get people to think outside of their natural sort of thinking rhythm.
Right.
What have you seen other people do? I mean, you know, I don't know about you, but lots of kids are online right now. And so they're getting lots of online stuff tossed at them. And, you know, what have you seen other people do that you want to do? And what kind of stuff do you need?
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Cool. Well, I think that's we're coming right up on the hour, so we'll go ahead and end there, but I will invite everybody to send in more questions. If more come up after the fact, we're going to send a follow-up note, and Teresa's email will be there. So if you have more questions, send them her way. And that's it. Okay, friends, good to see you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Thanks, Teresa.
Oh, you're welcome. It was great. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.